hear this.
It's lights out! Now you want to get nuts! Come on! Let's get nuts.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
I understood that reference.
Hey everyone, I'm Brendan Kelleher. So recently I finally got around to watching the Flash movie, and while I enjoyed it, it made me think about the current trend of big franchise movies, particularly superhero movies, to rely on fan service to get fans excited for their projects. The Flash is a movie that's been in development for a long time, and although the director and scripts went through lots of changes over the years, the general plot seems to have always been based on one of the most significant stories in the character's long history in the comics, Flashpoint. In this story, Barry Allen goes back in time to prevent his mother from being murdered and clear his father's name, who was wrongfully convicted for the crime. While he succeeds in this, it has the effect of altering the timeline into a reality where the DC universe is significantly changed. Bruce Wayne is killed while he's a small boy, and his father becomes Batman. War breaks out between Atlantis and Wonder Woman's homeland of Themyscira. I've always felt that this particular Flash story is one that you build up to, not be the opening entry in a potential Flash series. However, this is a story that they ultimately went with, rather than tell an origin story. To put this in perspective, imagine if they based the very first X-Men movie they made over 20 years ago on Days of Futures Past. Those of you who know what I'm talking about would surely agree that this wouldn't have been a suitable first movie in that particular franchise. And yet, rather than have the first Flash solo movie be about him getting his powers and fighting one of his most famous villains like Reverse Flash or Zoom, Flashpoint is what they ultimately went with. I'm guessing they did this just so they could shove it in as many cameos, including most obviously Batman, in the case of blatant fan service. So what exactly is fan service? Put simply, fan service is a narrative term that means giving a story's fans exactly what they want. While the term originated, and is still most often used in relation to anime and manga, it is now used to describe crowd-pleasing plot developments that occur in many types of stories. It's a form of pandering, really. For example, in my opinion, one of the most blatant uses of fan service is Star Wars The Force Awakens, the first movie in the franchise released by Disney after their purchase of Lucasfilm in 2012. This entire movie was rather cynically designed to appeal to the most common denominator of fans, and rather than tell an interesting story that enhanced the original movies, it was just basically an unofficial remake of the first Star Wars movie released in 1977. The Force Awakens was just full of scenes and moments to remind viewers of the original movie in a kind of, remember this? Remember this? Because nostalgia. It makes fans remember the first movie, and ideally makes them more inclined to like the movie they are currently watching. When Rey and Finn are trying to escape from a First Order attack on Jakku, Rey's first choice of ship is destroyed, and then this happens.
The garbage will do!
A friend of mine said to me once that when he saw the Falcon reveal, it made him cheer. I asked him why, and he couldn't quite articulate why he did this. He eventually told me it just stirred up strong feelings of nostalgia because he recognised something from his youth. It made him feel like he was meeting a friend after many years apart. My experience watching The Force Awakens was quite a different one. The constant callbacks and references got annoying after a while, and if I wanted to watch A New Hope again, I would have just stayed home and put that movie on instead. I wanted a new story, one that didn't ruin the legacy of the original characters or all what they accomplished in the classic trilogy. But Disney just wanted to use empty fan service to, supposedly, please the fans, not take any risks by actually telling an original story. But I digress. So why do the studios more and more rely on fan service these days? Let's take superhero movies as an example. There used to be a time when superhero movies were truly standalone stories that didn't rely on stunt cameos. The Superman movies from the late 70s and 80s starring Christopher Reeve took place in a DC universe where Superman was, as far as we know, the only superhero in the world. There was no Wonder Woman, no Aquaman, no Flash, no Justice League of any kind. This raised the stakes of each story, as it was up to Superman to save the day, and these were truly standalone Superman stories. Except for the third movie, which was basically a Richard Pryor comedy, but you get my point. The recent announcement by new DC Studios chief James Gunn that his new Superman movie will take place in a universe where superheroes exist and have done so for quite some time It makes me think this is yet again an example of DC not learning from their mistakes, and not slowly but surely building their cinematic universe. Say what you will about the current state of Marvel, what made the Infinity Saga work so well is that they took their time and spent 10 years building their universe from the ground up. It wasn't just cheap fan service by putting in stunt cameos from the get-go. The Flash movie's storyline seems to have been designed specifically just for some pointless cameos, supposedly just to make fans geek out. They have multiple versions of Superman making an appearance, just for the sake of it, except for the one that everyone wanted to see. It's a pity because what's been abundantly clear is that Warner Brothers seems to have no faith in the character of the Flash. It's a character that's been around in comics for decades, and there are so many great standalone stories they could have chosen. But rather than focusing on that character and having go up against some of the more significant villains in his rogues gallery, they just threw him into this superhero mashup along with the likes of Superman and Michael Keaton's Batman. Because why tell an interesting story when you can just have cheap fan service? Now, I'm not saying that fan service is necessarily a bad thing. There is a way of doing it right, and the payoff can be incredible. Let's take a look at the Avengers movies, for example. What's well known about the character of Thor in the comics is that he wields a magic hammer named Mjolnir, which only he can lift. Legend is that only those who are deemed worthy can lift it. In the comic history, Captain America managed to lift it, and in the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron, there's a fun scene where the team are having a party, and Thor invites people to try to lift the hammer, and they all fail. However, when Steve Rogers gives it a go, he just barely nudges it before apparently giving up. Thor actually looks worried there for a second. It's a nice bit of fan service, as those who've read the comics get the reference. However, this turns out not just to be fan service, but it's a story point that pays off in Avengers Endgame as the heroes battle Thanos. Thor loses his hammer and is about to be killed until suddenly, and the crowd goes wild. This is a fantastic example of not just good fan service, but terrific storytelling. Setup, payoff. It's ambiguous as to whether Steve could lift the hammer all along, or in this instance, finally being worthy. Personally, I've always thought that he knew he could lift it in Age of Ultron. He just didn't want to embarrass Thor. On the other hand, the most blatant example of bad fan service again comes back to a J.J. Abrams movie. Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker followed on from the highly divisive previous movie in the series, The Last Jedi. The latter film seemed to be designed by its director and writer Rian Johnson as a sick joke on long-running fans of the series, as it set fire, metaphorically speaking, to the character and legacy of Luke Skywalker, turning him into a pathetic old man who had given up on everything and everyone, a complete betrayal of the optimistic hero of the original trilogy. As a result of this backlash, The Rise of Skywalker seemed to be designed as a hastily made apology for that movie, effectively ignoring the events of The Last Jedi. The Resistance are back to full strength, despite being almost completely wiped out at the end of the previous film. Rise of Skywalker is even more full of blatant fan service than Abrams' previous Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens. They bring the old Death Star back, they bring Lando back, and since The Last Jedi killed off the trilogy's new master villain, Supreme Leader Snoke, in an act of desperation they bring back Emperor Palpatine, despite him being apparently killed off in Return of the Jedi. I mean, everyone likes the Emperor, right?
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Unfortunately, by bringing back the Emperor, J.J. Abrams once again makes all the accomplishments of the classic character's actions in the original trilogy all for nothing, just so that he can have Kathleen Kennedy's self-insert Rey finish off the Emperor properly, doing what Anakin and Luke Skywalker apparently failed to do. So what we have here is like The Force Awakens, a movie that's designed as blatant fan service, designed to supposedly please the fans, but instead becoming a direct insult to them, making the original movies null and void. Overall, I think the point I'm making is that fan service can be a useful tool by filmmakers to please long-time fans of a particular franchise, but they have to be very careful how they do it. Do it right and you end up with crowd-pleasing moments like in Avengers Endgame. Do it wrong and you end up with a creatively bankrupt piece of garbage like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Most importantly, you have to respect the source material, respect the lore, and make good storytelling your priority. You may not please everyone, but you will have at least told an original story that moves the franchise forward, rather than rely on callbacks and references to what we have seen before. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and would like to see more, then please give it a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Share with your friends, click the bell for notifications. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of fan service? Is it a good thing or bad thing? Most importantly, I hope you all look after yourselves, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.